All right, what's up? Welcome in another episode of GC Live, Thursday episode. Y'all know what that means. South Carolina versus Akron Preview, live here from BP Skinner in the Vista. Come on out, get your game day gear here at BP Skinner Clothiers here on Gervais Street, 1003 Gervais Street. We're live right now. If you're in town, if you're maybe getting a late lunch, hanging out, maybe you're already off work, come on by and see us. But if not, you still got plenty of time. Come by Friday. And they are, of course, open on Saturdays. It's a night game, so if you're in town, open 10 o'clock to 2 p.m. on Saturday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Come on by to BP Skinner. Get fitted for the game. Chris, we're going to dive into a couple other sponsors later on as well. Now we're going to dive into South Carolina versus Akron. I feel like Gamecock fans, they're doing everything in their power to put last week behind them, turn the page. Luckily, thankfully, not that Beamer would say this publicly, not that the team could think this way. I do think it's a little helpful that it's Akron as opposed to this being another, hey, get up for a big SEC opponent. We talked earlier this week about maybe some parallels to that Florida game at home where South Carolina had a chance to get a big win. This was way back, what was that, 2019?
Yep.
And the entire discussion after that game was about penalties and a lack of penalties called on Florida on a couple of plays, really one play in particular with two different penalties that could have been called. But all week long leading up to a trip to Knoxville, Tennessee, that was the discussion. At least with this, you know, it's not to disparage Akron, but it is a very, very winnable, a game that you expect South Carolina to be able to control. 4-touchdown favorite in this game. And, I think a chance for South Carolina to maybe get right and start to put last week behind them.
Yeah, it is. Wes, On3 now has the Massey ratings for high school and for college. And so I always like to look at that. And then I know you're a big ESPN FPI guy. Haven't looked at that. I assume you have that number in your head.
I don't. I know it's massive.
It's up there.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll Massey that. Yeah.
Massey number also massive.
Wait, hold on. Let me guess. 97% South Carolina.
Last time I looked, it was 99%. So I think, yeah, kind of crazy, right? And Massey had the Gamecocks losing to Kentucky and LSU, so one and one on those. Had them beating Old Dominion, so 2-1. So we'll see. Just one metric, right? But you look at this Akron team. You're right. It is a rebound kind of week. It's a week where the schedule is hard enough. This is one of your very few games that you can look at it and say this is kind of a reprieve, a should win. There's not many should wins. There's a lot of could wins. There's a lot of games for South Carolina where maybe they won't be favored, but it's still a could win, right? This is one of your should win games. And you look at Akron, not a very good football team, in terms of record. They are 1-2. They beat Colgate last week at home from the Patriot League, if you're not familiar with them. 30, I can't even remember the score, 31-20, I think it was, but they were down 17.
They were down early, right? Yeah.
Down in the first quarter. They played two other Power 4 teams, both from the Big Ten. They played Ohio State, 54-6 in that game. And then they played Rutgers, 49-17 in that game. Hung around with those schools for a quarter-ish and then eventually lost. So, is Shane Beamer going to come out and say, yeah, guys, we're just going to rest everybody and, it doesn't really matter? No, he's not going to do that. That would not be a very good head coach behavior to do that. But this is a week where, like you said, you don't have to get up for a big game. You can kind of move past the LSU debacle and move forward to this game and hopefully come out and play better and continue building confidence. Because we've talked about this. I think this team somehow is more confident coming out of the LSU game, even though you lost.
Yeah, you don't see that often, but I just think there's been obviously different expectations for this team coming in. And when I say that, I mean, you can ask maybe 15 different people coming into this season and hear a different thought process on what to expect from the South Carolina football team. And so I think you look at it, for a lot of fans I know and talk to, it was a little bit of, for obviously the disappointment of losing it and what could have been and talking about the referees, all that stuff. But there was kind of a lot of like, okay, this defensive line that we knew was good, looked like they belonged on the field, at times dominated. They got some of their wins. Did LSU's offensive line get some of their wins too? Yeah, of course they did. But when you're sitting there saying everybody is telling you these are two of the best offensive tackles in the country, they're both going to be draft picks, both, I think, conservatively, maybe first 2-round draft picks when they come out, and you're seeing Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart, and then, Gilbert Edmond getting back there as well. You're seeing South Carolina's defensive linemen create havoc up front. And you would say this team is maybe towards, we talked about this on our show with Tyler Head on 107.5. This team is a little bit more to the, like, if you had an expectation for, the D-line's going to be good, I think the D-line has skewed a little bit more towards, like, they could be great. And so this past week was a little bit of a barometer, a little bit of a test. Just how good are they? Just how good could they be? And I think the defensive front, say what you want about how the game ended, I think the defensive front passed that test. And looking at, if we want to bring it forward a little bit here, looking at this Akron team, they have really struggled on the offensive line going back to last year and then starting out this year. I think Rutgers got home twice, but Ohio State just really dominated them up front, as you would expect. And that was a huge thing for them this entire offseason. Can they fix their O-line issues? I tend to think, not that this is some great big limb to go out on, but I tend to think that the South Carolina defensive line, the South Carolina pass rush, should once again be able to take over a ball game on Saturday.
Yeah, that's where my head's gone, is South Carolina just overwhelming Akron defensively when the Zips are on the field. Wes, a lot of talk about Joe Moorhead, and the 2-quarterback system. It might be a decent time to dive into that. When Shane Beamer talks about the 2-quarterback system, or when we talk about it, don't get it in your head on Saturday night that you're going to go to Williams-Brice and there's constantly 2 quarterbacks on the field. It's something that they sprinkle in. They do some neat stuff, some different things on offense. Both of their quarterbacks, former Power 4 transfers, actually, from Cal and NC State, Ben Finley. And then their other quarterback, Taj Bullock, came from Virginia Tech. Their running back came from Michigan State. So they got some Power 4 guys.
They've got a lot of transfers on this team,
A lot
right?
of transfers on the team. A lot of guys who went Power 4 weren't playing as much. Situation wasn't right. Whatever. Step down. You see that a lot.
I think a couple of receivers are transfers. Yeah. A bunch of defensive guys are transfers.
Joey Hunter from South Carolina, as you mentioned. So they've got guys across the board that are powerful. So they've got some capable guys, but up front is obviously a big difference. And typically when you see a smaller school play against an SEC, Big Ten, Power 4 level school, that's where there's going to be some glaring differences, right, is in the trenches. And so if you're the Gamecocks, this offense, I think, presents some challenges if you're the Gamecock defense. And that, Jay Moorhead, head coach, offensive coordinator, offensive coach, he does some neat stuff. He's a bright guy. He'll give you shifts, motions. He'll give you eye candy. They'll give you the 2-quarterback thing. They use the tight end in creative ways. So you are going to have to be on it, especially if you're, South Carolina's linebackers. I think this is a big game for them because they're going to have to play discipline. But I like what you said on the game earlier today, Wes. At the end of the day, football is about blocking. And if Akron can't block the Gamecocks front, it's not really going to make a difference. And so that's, I think, one of your keys is just dominate up front like you think you can.
Yeah, the more ball I've watched over the years, I've sort of started – it's kind of a theory, but I think I believe the theory. Your front, especially if you're talking offensive football, you can set your floor of a team by basically can you protect your passer? Like I feel like that is almost a requirement. Like if you're going to be a certain level of football team overall, you've got to have some level of success in terms of your offensive line. Now, once you have that in place, to me, that's when you start looking at what does like an Ole Miss have in the skill player department? What does like an Alabama have? Georgia at times has been so dominant up front that they almost lean on that part a little bit more than some of those other teams. But that sort of sets the initial standard. And then now if that's equal, whoever has the best skill players, quarterback obviously still incredibly important. I really think South Carolina losing Lenore Sellers last week and the play of Garrett Nussmeier on the other side, huge determining factor in that game. And that kid just being willing to stand in and take hits and know, hey, I'm going to get hit, but I still know where this ball's got to go, and I'm going to deliver the football. I don't know if many quarterbacks South Carolina is going to face the rest of the way are going to stand in there and deliver the ball like he did. Now, some of them may, like, Jackson Dart, I think he's going to be a Heisman finalist. You look at Milroe, different quarterback. If you want to start to go game by game with who South Carolina is going to face. Let's see. I mean, you have some young, talented kids at some of the other spots. Oklahoma breaking in a new quarterback. But in terms of just knowing where to go with football, knowing, what it means to be a leader when you're down early and just sort of not panicking, very impressive, Nussmeier. I assumed he was going to be, we see when a Heisman winner or big-time elite quarterback moves along, it's very hard for a school to be like, oh, we're just going to plug somebody else in.
Yeah.
And I think he's definitely raised his draft stock. So point being, you don't know how many quarterbacks you are going to face this year that can do what he did to this defense. And I think the defense will go into this game, Chris. I liked how Clayton White was like, look, I'm going to be honest. Like it took a couple of days for our guys to get over this one. Sure. It wasn't just they're
human.
Yeah. It wasn't just 24-hour rule. They're fine. I thought that was a very honest, hey, this is, let's not pretend that wasn't tough to get over that.
Sure.
But I also wonder, and I know it was years ago, how much does Clayton White, having worked with Joe Moorhead, do you think there's conversation with Pete Limbo as well? They're in Buffalo in the same conference. I wonder if there's some familiarity. Certainly after this game, I would think there will be some discussion moving forward. But I just wonder how much the familiarity with Moorhead and what he's all about, because Clayton White said, essentially like he has a unique approach to offensive football that you don't see very many places. And I think maybe some of that familiarity helps South Carolina, but for the most part, to me, it is going to ultimately go back to, can this defensive front just take over the game?
Yeah, because a lot of times you see that. I mean, this coach is familiar with that coach. This coach knows that coach. Those things can be helpful or harmful to another coach if somebody kind of has the book on them at the end of the day, especially with the difference, the talent disparity, one level to stepping up to the Power 4 level. That really ends up making a huge difference. To go back to what Clayton said, by the way, I always do think it's cool when coaches are willing to humanize themselves and other players and not pretend, I don't even know, what day it is. We've been in a bunker watching film, whatever. Nobody likes that. Nobody believes it. And so, to be honest about it, Kyle Kennard, Wes, who, man, you want to talk about guys that have raised their stock? I was talking to somebody the other day about Kyle. Right. He might be a second-round pick now. He has really exploded his stock. I think he's been the best player on the defense, to be honest with you. But Kyle Kennard was like, how do you get over that game? Practice, So he's kind of threading the needle between like, I'm not happy about the game, but let's go out here and flush it and move on to the next one. And might be a motivating factor for this defense, honestly, going forward.
Yeah, for real. And I know you were watching some of their games from earlier this year. I think you had it pulled up at the station earlier as well. I also went the Phil Steele route because this has not been a lot of times either literally on the show or at least on one of the shows, we'll have somebody who covers the opponent come on and give us a little bit of just insight, just the insight you're only going to get from people who are around the team or watch the team every single week. And, Akron just, I didn't realize how tough of a job Akron is in terms of winning there. Mm-hmm. And, you look, not much media coverage for them. Not many, it's not just that they come from a, quote, smaller conference, but they just haven't been able to find many wins over the last few years. And Moorhead, I think most people believe, especially offensively, like
Yeah.
He's a bright guy. He could have a Power 4 OC job, at a major program right now if he wanted. We've seen that. He's been at Oregon, been at Penn State, but winning at a place like Akron is tough. So other than what we already know, was there anything when you were just going back and watching them that caught your attention about how they play, style of play, struggles, strengths? And it's hard going up against Rutgers and Ohio State. I mean, it's really that's tough for them.
Yeah. I mean, Ohio State ranked number 2 in the country. Akron's on the road. It's hard to walk away from that game and be like, man, here are 5 things I feel good about with Akron football this year. I will say this. I thought that they held their own up front more than I thought they would at times. So that's kind of, a leap to get there, right? But I didn't just see constantly over get overwhelmed. And as the game went on, they hung in there. They were actually up on Ohio State 3-0 because I think they scored on their first drive. They hung in there with Rutgers a little bit as programs take over. I think one thing that stood out is offensively, they can present you some problems just because of how they administer their offense, with, Moorhead doing things like lining up their second quarterback out wide, bringing them in almost like into an H-back position, then going under center, then taking handoffs. Like the fact that Ben Finley, who's their starting quarterback, he can move. They'll run zone read. If you leave him a running lane, he can take off. He's probably not going to run for 75 yards like the North Sellers, but he can run a little bit. So I think just you do have to have your eyes in the right place. So eye discipline is a big thing. Defensively, I didn't have any huge takeaways. I thought they played really hard, and I thought they looked pretty well coached. But at the end of the day, their undoing was Ohio State made a bunch of big plays through the air. Rutgers, Kyle Monangai, who's their really good running back, he rushed 20 times or so, had 200-something yards. So just big explosive plays. That was kind of the difference. The line of scrimmage over the course of the game and the explosive plays that they weren't able to stop. Those are the biggest differences, I think.
Yeah, and like I said, I kind of leaned on Phil Steele, and his approach coming into this year, his thought coming into this year is that their D-line and linebackers are actually maybe the strength of this team, and that maybe will play itself out once they face some conference opponents, more sort of similar talents, I guess, in terms of matchups. But they have a defensive end that came in from JUCO last year, sort of busted onto the scene, is very good. One thing they've really upgraded is their size. Like, they're not one of these smaller conference schools that's going to come in and just have like a 250-pound defensive tackle. Like they have 300-pounders inside. Like, they have decent size up front. They used to operate out of a 3-man front. I think they're a little bit more 4-down now. They bring back, their starting linebackers from last year. So on paper, that's sort of, I think, where they're leaning. Secondary, there are some questions. Like I mentioned earlier, Joey Hunter, former Gamecock, defensive back. I don't know if he's starting. He is playing. He's at least in the rotation there at cornerback. And, I think a good place to sort of take this right now is what happens at quarterback for South Carolina and how does that affect this game? Like, I think from a standpoint of health, you obviously, we've said this all week, you got to make sure if you're South Carolina that Lenore Sellers is 100% healthy, I think, before you trot him out there. Not that you're going to say, oh, we know we can beat Akron without him. But I do think in terms of how this game plays out, is it a little bit tighter? Is it just a straight-up blowout? My mind immediately goes to, do you have the passing threat of Sellers at quarterback, or are they going to take the approach? Frankly, a lot of fans have sort of voiced in that they want to maybe give Sellers the week off. Now, I think that's dangerous too. The more when you start to get to like if a guy is healthy and you're like, we're just not going to play him this week, that's to me a dangerous precedent. And he's a young player. Mm-hmm. And we also know that Sellers benefits, like he learns pretty quickly from things. There was a great anecdote from Dow Loggins talking about how they went over a look that Blake Baker had shown at Missouri last year. And they went over it on Friday. just as like one of those final little like, hey, they haven't shown this year, but if you see this, it may mean that. Yeah. And Dow didn't give the specifics, but on the strip sack actually, so it didn't turn out right. But Dow says, basically, I'm up in the booth and he changes the play or changes the look, changes the protection, changes something. And Dow's going, wait, what is he doing? Like, did somebody else, what are y'all doing? Did y'all signal something else? And Dow goes, oh. He remembered what I told him on Friday in passing. Mm-hmm. And so you're going, to me, every rep is valuable, but it's especially valuable for a guy who soaks everything up like it appears Lenora Sellers does. So I've always thought, like, sometimes as fans and media, we get a little too caught up in, oh, hold this guy out, hold that. Well, you got to play the games at some point. Like, you don't get to really scrimmage and practice for football. Yeah. So at some point you got to go play. However, I get both sides of that. I think, to me, fully depends on the information that they get leading up to the game in terms of where Lenoris's ankle is at, what his health is at. What is your expectation for the quarterback position on Saturday?
Well, without having kind of a final call here on Thursday at 2:27 Eastern.
Yeah, Beamer will talk again publicly this evening.
Carolina calls.
Yep.
See what he says. They don't have to put out the SEC mandated injury report because, of course, this is not an SEC game. I'm where you're at, where if Sellers is 75%, you don't play him. And the reason is, I mean, again, Beamer's not going to say this, but you do feel like going into the LSU game, and we now have evidence for this, I think, too, since Sellers did miss about half that game and they didn't end up winning. You needed your starting quarterback to beat LSU. Mm-hmm. Do you need your starter to beat Akron? Well, you hope not. We'll see what happens on the other side. But you've got this game followed by a bye week. So if he is 75%, can you get him to 100 by the time you get to Ole Miss? That's the goal. Then what is the information that you mentioned is your information. Hey, if he, we can tape him up. We can do this. We can do that. If he steps wrong again, might get a little worse. I don't have that info. So I think everything I've heard up until now is they're trying to rest him. They're trying to get him, to where they can get this thing right. We obviously don't have the full picture, but if he's not really, if he's a little bit worse than your typical, I just played LSU last week and I'm hurt because I'm a football player. If you're a little bit more injured than that, you probably got to hold him.
Yeah, and there's probably there's no such thing as 100% anymore. Like once the season starts, everybody's got a bruise, got something going on.
Yeah.
But if let's just say the threshold is like 95%, like, hey, you're banged up, you're bruised, but that's football. You're 95%. Anything below that, I'm just go win the game. Yeah. Get your other quarterbacks involved, and I'm curious to see what you think, man. I'm sort of expecting if Sellers doesn't go, and frankly, even if he plays, if you can get an early lead, I would probably definitely err towards getting him out of there pretty early. Do you think we see, obviously Ashford, but you think we see, I kind of get just the feeling we're going to maybe see Davis Bevel, maybe even another quarterback as well in this game?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and Beamer was asked about, probably in the comments, Wes, people were talking about Luke Doty probably. He didn't answer that outright, right? He said, maybe he's in the mix, could be in the mix, something like that. He did the whole thing where he was like, Akron, they play two quarterbacks. Maybe there's something for us there. I don't know if he was just saying that, making a joke. Maybe we might see that. It does seem like we could see more than one quarterback in this game, even if Sellers is not in the mix there.
All right, let's talk about a couple of sponsors, Chris.
Yeah.
We'll tell everybody about our friends over at Legion Investigative Group. Brad, I know him well. You know him well. Great Gamecock, much like Clint Hammond, who I'll tell you all about here in a moment. We like to have Gamecock supporters here on our show. Yep. And like we always say, if you don't need this service, that's fine. But if you possibly need this service, give those who support us and support the Gamecocks a chance to earn your business.
Yeah, for sure. And the cool thing about working with Brad is sometimes he can, even if you're saying, I don't really need that service, I haven't had my identity stolen, he can help you get out in front of things like that. How do you know who to trust with your business? How do you know who to trust with your investments or even your personal life? At Legion Investigative, Brad and his team, they help protect what matters most, like your identity, your assets, your peace of mind. He can give you a free consultation, and he can go over what you're doing from an ID protection standpoint, because identity theft and fraud are more common than ever in 2024. Legion Investigative Group's here to help. Whether you're an individual looking to protect your personal identity, your bank info, your credit cards, or a business who needs a thorough background check, due diligence, he can help you safeguard your interests. 2 ways to get in contact with him, Wes. Brad at legioninvestigativegroup.com, or you can give him a call, 770-235-7676. Again, 770-235-7676.
Yeah, shout out to Brad. And as always, shout out to our guy, Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans, ClintHammond.com, 803-422-6797, NMLS number 71597. If you're in the market for a new home, probably going to need a mortgage, and Clint can walk you through that process. Mortgage broker here in Columbia, but no matter where you are in the state of South Carolina, and in some cases, other states, Clint can help you. And if you're trying to go from rent to own, Clint can also walk you through that process, let you know what you can afford, what that looks like, and exactly what that entire process is like. Again, 803-422-6797. We're not quite on prediction time yet, okay, I don't think. Okay. But, Chris, maybe another big day for Rocket, potentially. You mentioned the Rutgers back, had a big day.
Yep.
My brain keeps going back to Beamer saying, want to get some other guys involved in the running game.
Yes.
You know, Oscar Attaway, Jordan Howell. Is there a surprise or two in store, or maybe one of these other guys? You know, it's always one of the more fascinating things to me is when we hear about guys in the preseason, and then we get into the regular season, and all of our focus is on like the games themselves, and there's somebody it never fails. It's always a guy or two, maybe more. There's somebody on that scout team that is just quietly busting their tails. Mm-hmm. And, you know, perfect example, look at Jaron Willis last year. Like, he hadn't even played a lot this year because they've had such an influx at linebacker. But remember, they said, look, this guy, we got to find a spot for this guy last year. Bam Martin Scott, a little different. He was like kind of in the rotation, but they go to that 3-3-5. All of a sudden, Bam Martin Scott goes from being a reserve player who was playing, as we've talked about many times, they didn't even rotate a ton at linebacker, to being one of the key players on the defense. So there's always a guy. Beamer has mentioned TJ Sanders before, how Sanders is just whipping people in scout team situations. And they said, we got to find a spot for this guy. You know, does like a DJ Braswell or a Matt Fuller at some point this year just emerge and grab some playing time? Mm-hmm. I don't know who that may be, but I do think Beamer was hinting at the idea we could maybe see some other guys get a little bit more involved in the running game this week, if nothing more than to just keep, like, Rocket has really shown no signs of rust. And so, yeah, you'd like to get him kind of lathered up and have another big day this week, but I think you'd also rather maybe spread that thing around a little bit this week too.
Yeah, and what you said about Rocket with no signs of rust, man, it made me think about how far he's come, right, since last year. Arkansas had him put on all that weight. He had a couple injuries. And Beamer alluded to it the other day, you know, when Rocket got to South Carolina as a transfer, was not in the best shape. He had to rehab his shoulder. You know, he had the knee injury last year as well. He needed to drop some weight. He needed to get back into playing shape because he did miss a lot of time last year. And then you've got a lot of rehab time where you're not able to fully work out. And he looks great, man. I mean, you see him bust off some long runs, and then he's just over there smiling. Like, he looks good. And he's a big-time player. Like, what he did against LSU, you really shouldn't be surprised because he's done it in the SEC before. That said, you would love to be able to get some of these other backs in the mix. If there's one surprise, maybe, Wes, about the team this year, we went through this with Tyler on the game the other day. Mm-hmm. Most position groups and things have been kind of close to what you thought. Like, some things a little better, some things a little bit worse. the fact that the other running backs have not been a little bit more involved might qualify to me as a surprise, because what we heard coming in was, yeah, Rocket's going to be the guy. He's really good. He's proven. But I thought we'd see a little bit more from some others. Maybe that's just been game flow stuff. Maybe it's been how good Rocket is.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like a good game to get some other guys involved, though.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And, you know, I think it's a good point, because we, for the most part, the questions that we thought were going to be question marks have kind of maybe been that to an extent. The strengths have kind of been the strengths. And, you know, and even if you nail it on those things, it doesn't mean you can accurately predict who's going to win or lose the games. Mm-hmm. But I think in terms of what this team is built on, it has been pretty close to what most people expected. But, you know, we heard a lot about, hey, there's depth in that running back room. And you knew Oscar Attaway was coming in as a veteran guy who, you know, had 2 big seasons at North Texas. And I would have thought we would have just seen him get the ball a little bit more. And even going back to the spring, the word we were hearing was, all right, Attaway is who we thought he is, who we thought he was when we recruited him. And then Juwan Howell, there was a lot of buzz about, hey, watch out for this guy. Like, he really looks like someone who can help this football team. We haven't seen him at all on offense. Mm-hmm. So I do think now Jawan's a guy, I just have a feeling like I feel like you look at him, Braswell, Matt Fuller, starting to look about the future of that room.
Yeah.
1 or 2 of those guys, I think, are going to be like the stars of the room down the stretch. Like next year, once Rocket's gone, once Attaway is gone. But for now, can you get at least 1 or 2 of those other guys involved? Juju wasn't as heavily involved this past week, but we did see, you know, week 1, he was like so close to breaking a couple of long runs. And I think he's going to break one on special teams eventually. Like, I think you've kind of seen that play out. But, yeah, we'll see. You can always learn something about a team, even from a game like Akron. Mm-hmm. Like, some of the stuff won't really be applicable to SEC contests, mm-hmm. but you can always learn something. So what do we get to see in terms of other guys getting involved? Can you get a big enough lead to have that sort of empty out the bench moment, which I think this is something Spurrier always believed, so valuable just for the morale of your locker room.
Yep.
That 3rd string, 4th string guy who he goes to practice every morning, he gets beat up, he wakes up early, he's trying to balance everything he has going on in college mm-hmm. life, but casual fans maybe don't even know his name.
Yep.
1 or 2 of those guys may have that opportunity to pick off a pass, score a touchdown, do something where everybody gets to celebrate. One of my favorite moments of the season so far was that video of Maurice Brown II.
Yeah.
When he got told he was going on scholarship.
Oh, yeah.
And the entire team just mauls him with excitement. Mm-hmm. And so seeing a guy sort of bust his tail, do everything right, get those opportunities. With this schedule, you don't really have that many chances to maybe blow a team out and get some of these other guys involved. Furman game last year, I remember us having this exact conversation. Can you get some of these other guys into the game? And that was our first chance to see Lenore Sellers as well. So is there a freshman, a young player who hasn't played as much that maybe gets onto the field a little bit more this week?
Yeah, well, you know, and those opportunities in SEC play are rare, Wes, because a lot of times those are 4th quarter games. The tough thing for our Kentucky friends, they got the human victory cigars broken out on them to an extent in Lexington. So that's what you want to see again in this game, mm-hmm. right? The opportunity. Can Maurice Brown go catch a touchdown pass this week? That would be something. You know,
he already blocked a punt.
You already blocked a punt, so
great timing.
Yeah, great timing. Can he go catch a touchdown pass this year? Yeah, and it gives us an opportunity. I mean, we love seeing some of these guys we don't get to see as much. You get to see a little bit of practice. You hear things. But for these backs and some of these backups that we haven't seen as much, how do they perform in a game? You know, that's helpful data. It's fun to watch. So
we got a commenter down there that a lot of people are familiar with. Our guy, Darius Rush, tuning in. And he says, defense going crazy per usual. # DBU. Darius, great to see you doing well, man. Hope you're doing great. See him with the Steelers out there doing his thing.
Yep.
With Grady Brown, former Gamecock.
That's right.
DB's coach. Love Coach Brown. Yeah, Darius, great to hear from you, man. And so, Chris, let's do it. Let's get to prediction time. I don't want to just drone on and on about the same things on this thing. Let's just be completely clear. Nobody's diving into Akron as closely as you're diving into all the little matchups that people want to hear about with an LSU or an Ole Miss or whoever else. So, O-line, like we said, the big picture to me is, they have this 2 quarterback thing. That's like a cool storyline. Joe Moorhead, good offensive mind. They've struggled offensively up front.
Mm-hmm.
They're okay defensively up front. Mm-hmm. But then still, I think it's a team you feel pretty comfortable about being able to kind of wear down if you're South Carolina. Yeah. So will that be early? Can you create some turnovers? These games, in my opinion, whether they're a blowout or it's more of like a slow burn, even Ohio State, it sounds like, was kind of a little bit of a slow burn early on. Then the floodgates kind of opened. Do you turn these teams over early on? That's when it just becomes blowout city. That's what I thought was going to happen against ODU when South Carolina got the early turnover. I was like, oh, it's going to be an early blowout.
Yeah, exactly.
So we'll see how it plays out. The other major storyline, we've talked about it quite a bit. Quarterback, does Sellers play? Does he not play? Do you hold him? We won't know that maybe until tonight, but really I would imagine game time decision, I think, the way ankles are.
That's my micro prediction. Remember how I broke that out?
Yes.
Micro prediction, Beamer doesn't say one way or another on Carolina calls tonight. I think we probably found out on Saturday.
Game day. Well, and I think ankle is such a potentially lingering injury. And like we've talked about, there are so many different levels of it's a sprained ankle.
Yeah.
That can mean
that's a range.
There's so many different little levels in the middle of those ranges. Mm-hmm. So who knows? We'll find out. I mean, this may be your classic because it's not an SEC game. This is going to be your classic where the media boys are out there binocular. Oh, Sellers is warming up.
He's walking. Yeah.
Yeah. Big Mun, the Mac, says Sellers needs to play. Sending him into the Ole Miss game cold. No way we don't give him a chance to sling it around. Well, I mean, I think, and the funny part is you have a lot of people who are very, very confident in the decision of don't play him or play him.
Yeah.
They feel very strongly about it. But it ultimately comes down to his health. Yes. Like that's going to be the most important thing. I don't think it's ultimately really about holding him or not holding him.
Yeah.
You should win this game without needing him. So he's got to be very, very, very healthy. If I'm making the decision, obviously I'm not for me to throw 16 out there, but we'll see what happens. So Chris, what's your score, man? Have you sent in your score on Gamecock?
I have sent in my score. I was telling
you. Do you remember it?
Yeah, I ran into him and I was like, man, I never remember what I sent. Then I have to look it up.
I need to check mine, honestly.
But I checked it earlier to make sure. Let me give one more thing before I get there. I'm glad you said that about Akron's defensive line. That was like my one defensive takeaway was, man, they play pretty hard, and they actually caused a little bit of disruption. I know you're like, they gave up 52 points, 49 points in a relative sense. So if there are a few plays on Saturday night where you're like, how's Akron getting penetration? How's Akron stuff? Like, I do think there's the possibility that we see a little bit of that. But I think Carolina can spring some big plays. Turnovers, I've got either a special teams or defensive score in this game. So we'll see. I'm with you on Juju McDowell. I've got Carolina 34, Akron 10.
You're lying.
That's what I've got.
This is ridiculous. You responded to Jack, not reply all.
No reply all.
No reply all.
No reply all. Ah, there you go. Yeah.
There, you probably can't see it.
You probably can't see it.
I mean, I have 34-10. Completely.
It's going to be the score.
All right, I guess probably means it will not be the score. But yeah, I have 34-10. You know what? As we were closing it out, a couple other things came to mind, Chris. Dow Loggins. Sometimes Dow Loggins will give you some little just insight that sticks to you a little bit. How about the little anecdote about hey, in the NFL, we know they don't care about running backs anymore. And in his press conference this week, that little thing about, hey, I got to the college game, and all of a sudden he's like, it took me a year or two, but I was like, wait, running backs matter here.
Oh yeah, we do running backs now.
Like running backs, that can be a difference maker. And for South Carolina, I wish I had in front of me that broken tackle stat, because I know first couple of weeks, Rocket was like leading the SEC, maybe the country, in broken tackles. Mm-hmm. Probably still up there, I would say. He's got to be. But the difference having that guy versus, just kind of not really having that dynamic ability at that position last year, it matters, I think. And I think that's when ultimately when and Mac and Dino say, I love our chances against every team on the schedule. If you want to be a glass half full Gamecock fan, this is more a big picture thought, not an Akron thought. The defense, if they can clean a couple things up, got to clean up the tackling a little bit, got to shore up the explosive plays and the run, just maintaining your lane integrity just a little bit more at times. But I lean on Cole Kubelik all the time. And he said that there's not a team in the country he has seen that flies to the football in terms of total overall team defense. Mm-hmm. This team does.
In college football.
Yeah. And this is a guy that watches every single SEC game every single week. So this is not me. We try to remain unbiased, but we're local. Of course, there's going to be some bias built in. This is a regional, national guy with no reason at all to make that up, right. Saying that. That caught my attention. And I think a healthy Rocket Sanders, if you have we've seen what Lenoris can do. That was the other thing Cole Kubelik said, is he didn't realize how advanced Sellers is at reading things out in the running game, like knowing exactly when to sort of press the hole, knowing when to give, knowing when to keep, all those things. We saw the speed against LSU. A lot of what you thought was kind of the game plan this year, to where you're going, hey, if this happens, they're going to have a chance. A lot of those ifs have actually turned to the affirmative, like, yes, okay. Check mark. You're going to be in a lot of these games, even the ones that prior to we maybe said that's going to be tough to win. I haven't quite decided if I'm ready to go there with Ole Miss. Like, I still think that's very difficult. Mm-hmm. But some of these other ones that were maybe a little bit more skewed heavily towards an opponent, I think Oklahoma is very beatable. I think A&M is very beatable. I think Missouri is actually very beatable because it's here. Bama on the road, tough. Clemson, very beatable. You should beat Vandy, should beat Wofford, obviously. And is that everybody? No, I'm missing somebody.
No, I think you ran through them all.
Ole Miss, we'll see. Yeah. But point being, get through this one. Keep everybody healthy. Do your thing. Keep building the confidence. Go into the bye week, and you have an entire extra week to prepare for Ole Miss, which should be a bonkers atmosphere again, and maybe a night game, we hope.
Yes, we hope. It's in that flex window, so we'll find out at some point, maybe Monday, and I think they can still do the 6-day window thing. So there was something about that I saw, and I can't even remember. But, yeah, it's a good point. I mean, if you're Carolina going into this season and you're like, hey, what's your path? What's kind of the formula need to be for this team? We have seen that. Mm-hmm. So, like we said earlier, some of the questions, like offensively, it's the passing game, receivers, sometimes protection, offensive line. We've seen some of those, right? So can they make those a little bit better each week and do enough? I think the strengths of this team are going to be defense and run game. That's what it's been so far. That's probably what it's going to continue to be. But you're in a decent spot right now. Go beat Akron, get to the bye week, have a huge game, hopefully tonight against Ole Miss.
All right, y'all. That's going to do it for this one. Let's tell you one more time, though. Come on down to the Vista, our friends at BP Skinner, whether it's for a wedding, whether it's for a big event you have, or maybe you just want to upgrade the overall wardrobe, or want to get ready for the Gamecock game on Saturday, or any game. Come on by, They're going to be open on Saturday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Also, you still have all day Friday to come down and get loaded up with your game day gear, especially if you're in town for, I believe we call it family weekend now. It used to be parents weekend. Going to be a lot of Gamecocks in town for that, I think. So come on by. Check out BP Skinner in the Vista, 1003 Gervais Street. Chris, you good?
Good.
Anything else?
That's it.
All right. For Chris Clark, I'm Wes Mitchell. Appreciate all of our supporters. Appreciate you for watching or listening. It's been the Gamecock Central live here at BP Skinner. We'll see y'all soon.